Nigeria. And with me today is Lanre Onasanya. I don't know if I've ever said the name right, but I think I'm getting closer day by day. I'm going to allow him to introduce himself in a couple of minutes, but I just quickly wanted to be able to share with you what the plan or the agenda for the day is going to look like, or for this evening is going to look like, and then I'll allow Lanre to quickly introduce himself. So we've got we've worked together, we put together a couple of slides. The topic around organizational capacity, or actually to be more specific, people within the context of startups, is a topic that's very close to both our hearts. So Lanre and I had a really good time kind of curating and putting down what we felt we really wanted to talk about with you today. So we'll kick off with welcome and introductions. I think I'm in the welcome part. We'll do intros shortly. And then after that, we will go into a little bit of understanding around what the key levers for growth are and where and how we map people onto that equation. We'll touch about hiring for growth, and then we'll touch on culture as your competitive advantage as a growing business. And then after that, we'll open for questions, feedback, comments, reflections from the audience. At any point in time through the discussion, if you really feel you have a burning point or a burning question, please don't hesitate to put up your hand. I will serve both in a lighter speaking capacity, but more as a moderator in this session, and I'll be able to take your questions and I'll be able to see when you've got your hand up, so don't worry about that. So I think in terms of, I don't think Lanre will take more than an hour. And typically, truth be told, I've known Lanre for very many years, and both he and I are very well known for our gift of the gab. So if you feel we're, talking too much and running away with the agenda, please feel free to put up your hand and shut us up as well. It doesn't matter. Okay. So I'm going to go into quick introductions, and actually I'm going to start with myself, and then I'll hand over to Lanre to introduce himself. So as I mentioned, my name is Tonya Kariuki. I work with Telistic. Prior to that, I'm one of those people. It's almost like a what is it? It's almost like a dinosaur concept these days, but I'm one of those people that spent literally my entire career at one organization. I joined Microsoft as, if I'm not wrong, I think I was the first employee in Sub-Saharan Africa. Joined Microsoft straight out of college. I studied law. I had the opportunity to be in a number of very different and diverse roles within the organization. So I spent quite a bit of time, first off from a finance, admin, legal perspective, and then I moved on to a marketing function. I have great experiences in both channel, product marketing, and then of course, revenue marketing, before I moved into a general management role thereafter. At some point there, I was convinced to have a short-term stint in HR. And so I went and spent 5 years in the people function across West, East, and Central Africa. And then after that, I went back and in a marketing capacity in an organization called Microsoft for Africa, which was really probably my best role in the entire company. We were really focused on catalyzing the African market and the African technology ecosystem, which is where I fell in love with the startup story. Thereafter, I realized it was 20 years, and really it was time for me to, I really felt like at that point in time, I was, number one, in great danger of having a very myopic view of the world if I wasn't there already, which meant that for me, it was the world according to Microsoft. And so I thought to myself that I wanted to try something different. I took a role with GE Healthcare as their CMO in Africa. And 6 months in, I realized it was the complete opposite of the tech universe that I was coming from. So I didn't enjoy it too much, and I ended up doing just a year at GE, at which point I left and started up my own company. I hope in today's discussion we have the opportunity, and I really hope I can draw on a lot of my different experiences as we talk about people and how to leverage what is essentially and most likely your most important, most versatile resource that you have in your organization. And I really look forward to a great discussion. I'm going to hand over to Lanre, but before I do, cards on the table. I've known Lanre for, I think it's about 20 years, Lanre, if I'm not wrong. Lanre was the first employee for Microsoft Nigeria. and he and I became really good friends in the workplace. I'll allow him to introduce himself, but I think the most important thing about our friendship has been that even beyond the organization itself, we have continued to be friends. We're doing some exciting thinking together around how do we how do we how do we help Africa's people really realize their full potential? And it's really wonderful to have you joining us here today, Lanre. I'm going to ask you to quickly introduce yourself, and if you need me to slide to go onto your intro slides, I can do that too.
Thank you, Tonya. Can you please confirm that you can hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Great. So thanks. That was as you started out your intro. You know, when you were looking for the word, you that we tend to use in Nigeria. You feel like the ancestors of tech on the continent. But good evening, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. By way of introduction, I think the stuff that Tony has said are critical. For my story, and I've just looked at the list of the people on the call, and this is somehow, you know, when you're an ancestor is when, oh, okay, I think the connection is playing. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I wasn't sure if it was my end or if it was your end. Can anyone else on the call just indicate if you're having trouble hearing Lanre, or is it just me?
I just found the person I'm going to pick on. You okay?
Yeah, I had.
Go ahead, Comfort.
But I can hear you now.
Okay.
Thank you. No, I was just looking through the list of people on the call, and I said one of the tests of being an ancestor is when you have these calls, you look through the list and see, is there someone you know? And yes, I know someone, Olagamikom. Yeah. So anyway, I think he's an insurance ancestor. that I can say. Anyways, so for today's conversation, like Tony has said, one's journey prior to, I think the first 10 years of my career, I worked in different industries, financial services, logistics, healthcare in terms of that pharmaceutical, before I then joined the tech industry, was part of the team in Resourcery. So Resourcery was a leading networking company back in the day. And I think from Resourcery, was where I then joined Microsoft as its first employee in Nigeria. So Tony and co were already in the game in Africa. So, but I mean, Microsoft was the longest place I worked, just like you, Tonya, apart from being an entrepreneur, which is, I think a few years ago, I realized I'd spent more time being an entrepreneur than working for Microsoft. And that journey, the Microsoft journey, like Tony, I went through different roles, enterprise financial services. So enterprise account manager for financial services, did bits of marketing, did intellectual property management in Nigeria, which is an interesting one, did channel building and channel management, eventually went on to do sort of what you will call, the Emerging Market Africa project, which was taking the Microsoft business into countries that it had never been before. So kind of like that founder startup type mentality of an existing business, and then doing public sector. And I did leave Microsoft then to be a founder myself. Started a company that was partnering with a global company, eventually bought that business out, and then went through a merger. So my entrepreneurial journey started from that space of founding and all of the different elements of that. So that's I would say, to the extent of this conversation. So to get your questions, it will be interesting to share perspectives with you, because I would say I just realized in the past 14 years I've been working on the people side of business, being a performance consultant. I think that's probably the easiest way to describe what I do. and performance, human performance, not financial, human performance. So that will be, and also I'm an executive coach as well, and also spend time doing advocacy work for professional coaching in Nigeria as a board member of International Coaching Federation. And on that platform, I get to work with different types of organizations, executives, as well as founders of organizations. That's it for now, Tonya. Oh, back to you.
Okay. You know, Lanre, when we talked about doing your intro, I was hoping that you can tell us a little bit more
Hello,
about
Tonya, can you hear
what
me?
it's. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Great. Hi, Ola. I see your message. Good to have you here.
Good. So, Lanre, do you want to tell us a little bit more about what your organization does?
Yes. Okay. So AT Bonham, we see ourselves as performance consultants. We're a performance consulting organization. We have a specific focus on the African continent, and you may understand that from some of the work I had to do in my Microsoft life. So we're focused on the African continent, but interestingly, COVID got us our first customer in the US. You know, during COVID, we had the opportunity to work with a customer in the US. And what we do is simply helping organizations understand what they need to do to improve the performance of their human capital. Get the best from that investment in human capital. We do it through, so there are a number of practices we have in the organization that help to drive that. So whether it's about leadership, developing leadership, whether it's about making teams more effective, whether it's about understanding how to use tools to drive performance or managing performance generally. So there are a number of practices within the organization, but it's all connected to driving and improving human performance.
Great. Thank you, Lanre. I'm just going to ask you for 1 minute.
Tonya?
I think my connection is the one that's troublesome. So I just want to connect to a different Wi-Fi. If you guys don't mind, just give me 1 minute to do that, huh?
Okay. No, that's fine. That's good. I will just maybe as Tonya is getting ready to ask participants if you can just type in the chat box. If you can just type in the chat box, you can type the word check to confirm that you can hear us and you heard all that we have said. And then maybe if you can share one thing in terms of introducing yourself, but you can use chat box. And if we have time, I would pick maybe 1 or 2 people to say something, just so that we get. All right, Damola, I see your check. And then you can say what's the one thing in terms of introducing yourself. I don't know how to pronounce Ashil. Is Ashil? Would that be correct pronunciation?
Yes, that's
oh,
perfect.
good. Thank you, Ashil. Ashil, where are you joining us from?
From Florida.
Okay, good. Good to have you. It's more earlier in the day for you.
Yes.
Good. So anybody else? I think I'm admitting somebody else. If you guys can just, oh, I didn't know my camera was off. All right, Sheung. Yes. So what would introduce, if you were to introduce yourself, right? Guys, what would you like us to know about you as we go into this conversation? So that Tony and I know how best to support you. Well, I have some good news. I've arrived at my location. I just need to, as soon as Tony takes over, I'll go in. What would be useful for us in terms of today's conversation, talking about the human capital side of organization. Okay, Tonya, you're back.
I am back. I think I can hear you loud and clear. Can you hear me and see me still?
can hear you and see you louder and clearer.
Excellent. Good. So I'm just going to share my screen one more time. All right.
Good. And I can tell you,
So-
Tony, I've arrived at my location. I just need 5 minutes to get inside. So I will be on and I will reconnect shortly. All right.
Okay. All right. So, and thank you to Lanre for holding while I relocated myself and connected to a different Wi-Fi. If there's any issues hearing me, please just let me know. But I think that this should be a bit more stable. I think I was a bit too far away from the router. All right. So while Lanre settles himself in, we debated, and really thought about if we're talking about people today, we want to be able to look at it from a broader perspective in terms of when you look at the entire set of resources you have for your organization, where and how does the people narrative play? And for me, I thought I would, it would be great to start off with what is one of my favorite sayings, and I should just run a quick quiz here. One of my favorite sayings is, give me a place to stand and a lever long enough and I will move the earth. So without checking on Google who said this, I'm just trying to figure out who was paying attention in school. Quickly type into the window who said this statement. Give me a lever long enough and a place to stand and I will move the earth. Type your answer in the window. I promise you there are no prizes. I just want to know, if you're paying attention, one, and if you know who said it. Come on, more than one person. I see Ashil is typing. Give us your views. Let's go. Dig deep. This is how we know who was paying attention at school and who wasn't. Nothing? I have to tell you guys, if this was a Kenyan cohort, we would have 50 answers already, huh? Okay, somebody seems to be typing, and I want to give them a moment and see if they get it right. And unfortunately, I don't have my second screen anymore, so I'm just going to go back to the saying. And I think for me, the whole purpose behind this statement, by the way, it was Archimedes, in case nobody got that, right? So it's Archimedes' principle is the principle of leverage, or one of his principles, the principle of leverage. And really what he says is, give me a lever long enough and a place to stand and I will move the earth. And I think a lot of our conversation today is about the resources you have and how to leverage those resources within the context of your business. So having said that, we then thought to ourselves, if you look at leverage as a set of tools and resources that you have, how does that play up against, how do they play up against each other? And how and when do you use a certain piece of leverage and when do you use the other? And essentially from a corporate perspective, you're always going to have potentially 3 types of leverage. And I like to look at them as people, capital, and code. The first is what we're going to talk about, and it's people. Essentially, it's labor. And when you think of labor, you think about it in the context of how many people, or what's the size, or what should the structure of the labor that you have within your organization be, and how do you get the best out of people or labor or human capital as a form of leverage. There's always going to be positives and negatives as far as labor is concerned. I really think that, the reason why it's a great form of leverage, but the reason why, in my view, of the 3, it is the toughest form of leverage is because for you to be able to leverage labor well enough, it means that you need to be a superb leader. It means that you have to have great leadership skills. I was going to actually say exceptional, but I actually think that the word would be great leadership skills. Because when you look at people as a resource, there's going to have to be a huge number of elements that go into that. It's going to be, how do you guide them? How do you reward them? How do you attract, retain, and develop and grow your people? So that element of people or human capital as a form of leverage is a fantastic form of leverage, but the most difficult form of leverage. The second is capital. And I think, we're talking to startups here and we're talking to tech startups here. So I don't think I need to over elaborate on the potential of capital in terms of being able to grow and exponentially scale your business. Capital is a fantastic form of leverage, right? There's only, in my view, and Lanre, I'll ask you, I hope you've settled in now because I'd love for you to chime in on some of these in a minute. The only thing with capital is that, number one, it requires you to be a great capital manager to be able to really leverage capital well enough. But secondly, when we're talking about capital as a form of leverage, and particularly third-party capital that's coming from outside your organization, I think we all know the pains that go into properly fundraising and being able to have the right amount of capital that helps scale your business. But on top of that, it also means that you have to give away something of your own, right? So you're either going to give away some form of equity, or you're going to go into debt, or whatever the case may be. The point of capital here is that, or the point with capital here is that it never comes for free. And particularly as an early stage startup or as you're trying to grow your business, the question around capital is, where do you find enough capital to allow you to really scale your business? Which brings us to the third form of leverage. And it's so fantastic whenever we're talking with a tech team and a group of tech startups, because this is the one piece of leverage that I don't think I need to over explain, which is really the nature of code and really why technology or software has taken over the world. The best thing about code is that for scale purposes, it has a minimum cost of replication. So if you write beautiful code and you build a fantastic platform, it doesn't exponentially cost you more to service 10 or 100 or 1,000 customers. It has a minimum cost of replication, whereas with people and with capital, you have a larger cost of replication, right? So I think when we look at it from these three angles, my overall take, and I'll open up, Lanre, for you to make a couple of comments, is obviously we've got the people piece. And honestly, I don't believe that this is an either or conversation. I don't think you can do without any of the three, but we've got the people piece that requires strong leadership skills. We've got the capital piece that honestly is not infinite. And you really need to be a good capital manager to turn capital into a form of leverage for you. And then we've got the code, which you're already in the business of, which has a minimum cost of replication, but cannot exist in a vacuum. It needs both people and capital. Today's conversation is focusing on the first, which is people. Lanre, are you settled in? Do you want to make a couple of comments on this before we move on to the next piece? Lanre, are you there?
Yes, Tony, I'm back.
Okay, good.
Yes.
So, any comments on this before we move on to the next piece?
I was disconnected for a bit. So Tony, I don't know if you're expecting.
Yes, just your view on the
me.
three. Yes, please. On the three forms of leverage, people, capital, code, just your take on that.
I think, oh, sorry, I was disconnected for about 5 minutes, but I can, if I speak to that, if you just put the slides back up in terms of.
I don't know if you can see my screen. I'm sharing my screen. No. At least I thought I was.
I can see you, and I can see Ashil.
Let me do it again. Sorry. My bad.
I'm speaking about that. That's right. There is somebody who's in the lobby trying to come in. If someone can, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Good. I believe you have spoken about leverage in terms of the.
That's exactly where I am. For your views, your comments on this. Yeah.
I comment. So when you think about business and leverage, I look at these three things, and I would say let's think of them in terms of different forms of capital, right? You have what I would say is human capital, which is people. Financial capital, that most people refer to as capital. And then you have code, which I would say, let's call that intellectual capital. So when you look at the three forms of capital that are required to drive a business, you'll find that, and the choice you have to make resources are always limited. So at different points in time, you will have to take a decision as a founder or as an executive in a business, which of these do you invest in? Which form of capital do you invest in? Now, there can be there are various perspectives as to whether one capital is more important than the other. So as someone who plays in the human capital space, the tendency is to say that human capital is the one that's most important. And why is that? Why do people say that? You create your intellectual capital from your human capital. If you have financial capital, and you still need human capital to manage it. But on the other side would be, if you have great human capital and you do not have the financial capital to make the business work, what's going to happen? You will probably lose that human capital. And even if you have financial capital and human capital, and there is no code, there is no intellectual capital, which could be the practices and the processes. So it's not just the code you create. There's certain processes, the ways of doing a particular business that we can also categorize under intellectual capital. There's a way, the culture, the different want to share with our audience, a way to view these three items that can be leveraged in creating a business.
Yeah. No, and I think I like the way you've put it together in terms of human capital, financial capital, and then intellectual capital. Because at the end of the day, it's all forms of capital. The question is what motion works for whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. So Lanre, so because today's focus is purely on human capital, we're going to kind of hone in and focus a little bit more on hiring for growth. And I know we did some work in terms of just really trying to figure out for the cohort exactly what should, like if we were to provide you with a framework based on best practices that we've seen across the market, based on best practices of what we've experienced as well, what would that framework look like depending on the stage of growth that an organization is at? And so what we've taken the liberty of doing is kind of saying that, if we looked at a startup based on the different phases of maturity, could we, to a certain extent, be able to provide you with some level of framework that helps you think through what types of human capital you need to be able to scale your business from the first to the next until you get to the point where you're driving hyperscale in your organization? And so we took a stab at kind of saying, these are, if we kind of broke down the early, mid to late stage startup nomenclature and broke it down a little bit further and said, okay, fine. So what does it look like at a founding stage, early stage, all the way up to scale? And what are indicators around, from a human capital perspective, what sort of investments do we typically see in terms of overall numbers? And that's what you'll see on the left side of the screen there. So at founding stage, we expect you to be mostly made up of your founders, and you have anything between 0 to 5 employees. At this point in time, what we recommend you should be looking at is, number one, it's most likely that it's you and a group of co-founders and maybe 1 or 2 very early stage employees that are working at the company at this point in time. The huge focus at this time is really going to be around building or developing a great product and finding the right product market fit, right? And the type of people that do well in an organization at this stage is generalist types of resources. So people who are very adaptable and they don't mind rolling up their sleeves and getting their hands dirty. Typically, sometimes even at an early stage, you find that some startups will have a VP of this or a VP of that. That's completely irrelevant at this point in time. It actually doesn't make any sense. What you really want to do here is have a core group of people who are invested in the vision, who are actually focused on building a great product and finding the right use cases for customers to actually end up adopting this product. And you're best served at this point with a group of broad generalists, right? And then you start to look at the next phase. So you've come out of founding stage and now you're essentially still an early stage startup, because founding is really quite the earliest stage, but you're somewhat, like kind of growing a little bit, and you found your product market fit. And that's what we define as an early stage startup, right? At this point in time, the whole idea, or what your primary focus as an organization should be, is launching the product, getting the product out to customers, and really starting to think of your brand, what you're known for, and what problem you're trying to solve for. So at this point in time, you've come out of phase one, which is you've built a great product, more or less. You've somewhat figured out product market fit, but at this early stage, you're really trying to kind of sharpen the use cases around that and honing that product market fit. And you're starting to think of how to get the product out in front of customers. Now, these are not necessarily, or the difference between one stage and the next is not necessarily determined by a function of time. It's really generally the pace at which you're accelerating and the velocity with which you're growing your business, right? So that's what we kind of look at early stage. The next stage thereafter is what we call the traction
Tonya,
stage.
I wanted to just add, Tonya,
Yes.
Can I just add a bit to these two stages in terms of the type of people?
Go
so
ahead.
You're looking for people who thrive in figuring stuff out. You know, that mentality of we're figuring it out. People who are less concerned about, or you want a culture where there's less concern about who's doing what, but more to be in a space of there's something to be done. We're all jumping in. I mean, someone is going to jump in, figure it out, and sort it out, rather than that delineation of this is my role, this is my role. In those two stages, stage. Please go on, Tonya.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I want to confess a little bit. I've got such a soft spot for generalists. I'm a generalist myself, and maybe that's why I have the soft spot. And also when I look at my own career, I think I know that when I'm at my best is when I'm in that figuring things out. I love starting stuff. Not everybody's a born generalist. Not everybody can live in the land of ambiguity and not really knowing what to do. So these are probably some of the hardest hiring decisions you would ever make as a startup founder. How do you find those people who don't care necessarily about what their job description said versus what they have to do, but are adaptable enough to move across the spectrum of problems that may come at you or challenges that need to be resolved? So these early stage employees or early stage hires are some of the most important hires that you're ever going to make. And then when you reflect on the fact that both you and your co-founders are early stage hires yourselves, it's really important to be able to be multi-hatting and to ensure that amongst yourselves, you've got good coverage across the different functions that need to be fulfilled. So great point there, Lanre. So the next stage is what we call the traction stage. And traction, by definition, means that you're starting to have paid customers or paying customers, right? So you're starting to earn some level of revenue. It could be very little, but essentially you're showing that the product you've built, that there's a need and there's a customer who identifies with your product and will hire your product to do that job of fixing problem or challenge X for them. So traction is really about paying customers and about generating revenue. This is where your first revenue really starts to check in. At this stage is where you really want to start investing in a sales or a biz dev function in your organization, because the most important thing for you here is to get your product in front of as many customers as possible and really start to show that traction in terms of paying customers, right? It's also the stage, because for me, if you look at the two earlier stages, and if you're like me as a founder, one of the biggest things I really struggled with was figuring out the pricing for my services or my product. Sometimes you're led by what your competitors are pricing at. But to be honest with you, if that's your only strategy, you don't really know whether you're leaving value on the table or you're leaving money on the table, or actually, quite frankly, you're probably even running at a loss because you're only using competitor-based pricing. This is the point where with business development and sales, you have the opportunity to get closer to the customer. And that by default also means that you have the opportunity to start figuring out or optimizing your pricing model. And even more so, as we're seeing in the market these days, start to understand how you can use pricing as a competitive advantage. So it happens at this stage. The second thing you want to invest in the traction stage is a board of advisors. Now, I am a big fan of advisors. And in the next couple of slides, we'll talk about, where you source your talent or how you source your talent. But for me, advisors fit, and it's really surprising. I said to you guys, I spent most of my life in corporate, 21 years in corporate. It never ceases to surprise me, even today, for my friends who are sitting in the corporate space, how much they want to be asked to help a startup, how great it looks on their CV to say advisor to startup X, or I sit on their board of advisors. And typically board of advisors are not paid for positions. So people do this almost as a volunteer, and you really want to leverage this advisory component. So you want to be able to take a step back, look at your organization, figure out where you have gaps, particularly, for example, if you find you have a gap in growth, right? You really want to figure out, could I get a great advisor who will serve on my board of advisors, essentially at little to no cost, but will really bring some huge muscle in terms of plugging in that gap. So it's a strategy that I advise not too early, because advisors are typically operators and they like to have something that they can sink their teeth into. So at this stage is a great time for you to start reaching out for advisors. Ensure that you're mapping that against the competencies that are lacking within your organization. So for example, maybe you hire a group of salespeople, but you don't have a chief of sales or a VP of sales or whatever you want to call the role. This is a great time for you to look for an advisor who is a super VP of sales that can sit on your board of advisors and provide the requisite support to your team. So 2 things for me in the traction stage. This is the time to invest in biz dev, in sales, and really look to optimize pricing and understand where the value is for your customers. But secondly, you kind of want to see where you can almost in a clever way, get the right resources into your organization, particularly senior level resources that really help you think about how you're going to grow and scale the organization. Lamra, do you want to comment on this traction stage and particularly board of advisors and so on?
Yes, I specifically board of advisors. The key thing you said is about choosing board of advisors at the traction stage. If it's too early, you may find advisors that if there is no specific challenge for them to sink their teeth into, then they may try to be doing what you're doing or helping you found your company, so to speak. So it's important to have clarity in choosing who you have on your board of advisors. It's important to have a specific area you want each member of the board to focus on for you. It's important to sort of have, so it's not like you're giving them like their job spec, but it's important to have clarity on the conversation about the value each member of that board of advisors will bring to you, and to sort of have some timelines to the things that you're doing. So it's not a permanent board of advisors, because the risk there is either side could get tired. Of course, like Tony said, there are a number of people who are willing to give. Of course, this could be friends, family, mentors, and all of that. It's important to put a time frame to it so that there is that room to exit for both parties. Either you choose or they choose. So yeah, that clarity on the value that's going to be added. Be sure to enable them sink their teeth into something they're really good at, that is not their full-time job. So be mindful of taking on retired people as advisors as well, and then also have a timeline. Those would be my tips.
Yeah, great point. Okay, which takes us to the next stage. And the next stage is your growth stage. So at this stage, if you look back and reflect, so you've got a great product, you figured out your product market fit, you've got a great bunch of sellers already that you've kind of put in place, you've got a strong board of advisors, you've figured out your pricing and your product is getting in front of customers. So this is when you really now want to kind of take everything that you built on and start to gear that towards a strong growth plan. So at this stage, couple of things that you want to do. It's definitely the time for you to start looking at specialists, right? And specialists come with specific needs. So it can be specialists from a tech standpoint. So this is maybe where you want to start looking at what does your tech team look like? How do we optimize our user experience? How do we optimize our kind of our engagements with our customers? You want to start thinking things like customer success and your support structures inside the organization. So this is really the time when you can afford, you've got good enough traction, you've got a solid bench of customers, you can afford to start thinking of specialists and then start thinking of additional use cases for your product, right? But at the same time, as you all know, this is when you're starting to gear up for major growth and for scale. So at this point in time, whereas before you may have been okay with a group of bookkeepers or a bookkeeper and someone is doing invoicing and that sort of thing, at this stage of the growth stage, it's really recommended that you start to invest in a proper finance resource, right? Because at this point, you're probably going to be thinking about raising capital. You've got the right components for that. You've got a great product, you've got paying customers, you've got the right traction. So now is the time for you to start looking a little bit deeper around the metrics that matter to investors. So you want to understand what's your burn rate, how are you managing money, how do you start planning for the cash flow that you have, how much do you need to raise? This is not going to be done for you by a bookkeeper. So this is why at this stage is where we say that probably one of your most significant hires will be a senior finance resource or a head of finance. At the previous stage, you probably leverage somebody on your board of advisors to help you think through the financial components of your business that are beyond bookkeeping. At the growth stage, you want to start looking at specifically investing in that. Any comments on the growth stage, Lanre?
Yes, Tony, I actually have a question for you. You know, like you said, this stage is when you look to specialists. So what I think is usually a common challenge for founders is when you are the specialist. So for example, if the founder is a specialist in finance, and you know, like you said, hire head of finance, what's your advice for founders at that? How do you resolve that challenge of you're a specialist in that area? Do you still hire someone? And how do you even work with that? How much do you want to trust that person? What's your advice on that?
You know, I think that it is a fallacy for any founder to imagine that they could be a specialist in their own business, particularly if you're the one running the business, which typically is what happens, right? Because at this stage, you're not just the CEO. There's this common joke, you're the COE as well. You're the chief of everything, right? And the amount, so specialist may be, it can be viewed through two lenses. It can be viewed through the first lens, which is you have that specialized skill for that particular function. That's great. But the question for founders is always around, but do you have the capacity to execute against that imperative within your organization at that point in time, which takes you away from actually being able to be a specialist. In fact, if you notice the trends that we see is founders probably start off or mostly start off as generalists doing everything. And then you hire specialists. And eventually for founders who really love one component or other, particularly when it's a hardcore tech founder, like what we've seen even globally happen with, I don't know, like a Bill Gates, right? They end up coming back into the business as a specialist and leaving the general managed components to an individual that loves to do that stuff. So my advice here is if you're the founder and you feel you're the specialist, it's important to look at it through two lenses. You may be a specialist because you have the expertise for that particular competency that's required. But the truth is, with the number of things that a founder is handling at this stage, you don't have the bandwidth to specialize and be able to deliver against that imperative here.
Yeah, good point, Tonya. The way to summarize it is, you are now a specialist in leadership, no longer a specialist in finance. And it's important to make that distinction. It's not easy. It's not easy, but at the growth stage is when you need to start learning, because that's where you need to start learning that specialist skill of being a leader. Because I don't think it's at the scaling stage that you want to start learning that.
No. And I think the important point there as well is that it has to be learned. Because I think oftentimes for founders, you kind of stumble on it and suddenly your organization has grown, you have 50 employees, but has that leadership skill been learned? And I think that's part of what we're going to discuss today. Yeah. Good. Which brings us to the last one, which is the scale stage, right? So at this point, and inshallah, we all get there, right? So your business is booming. You've figured out your product. You've even got additional use cases. You're selling and you have a sales organization that's actually doing things, right? Like stuff is actually working. You've got a strong board of advisors and they've really helped plug in the gaps. You're now starting to think of your burn rate. You're thinking of raising your, funds and that sort of thing. And all of that then leads to what we generally define as scale. And scale is typically when you start to see an exponential growth in terms of revenue, in terms of customers, and also more importantly, in terms of people. And this is the stage where we recommend, as you're going into scale, you really want to start investing in a head of people. This is the point in time where when it was small and manageable and you were a family, and how many founders do you say, it feels like being with a family? It was okay. Everybody kind of got what everyone was doing, and it was easy for you to spot who the superstars were, and it was easy for you to spot who needed to leave the organization. But at the point you get to 50 employees, you just cannot typically keep a strong enough handle on all the dynamics that are happening across your people, the people in your organization. So this is when we recommend that you invest in a head of people. It's also the time that you're going to make one of the most important hires in your organization, which is your ops side of things. So you're focused on the general overall growth of the business. At this point in time, you're also the spokesperson of the business. You're the face of the business. You're the part of the brand, right? You're kind of trying to make sure that you have the right leaders in place. Operations is really what keeps everything running. And the problem with operations, and I think you've seen a number of companies, even if you just follow in the media today, where customers will be talking about, nobody comes back to you on this, my transaction didn't go through, blah, blah, blah. This is where stuff breaks. So at this point in time, given the fact that you've started to experience real traction and growth in terms of customers and revenue and people, you really want to make sure that your operations are lined up well enough. The third thing is a board of directors, as distinguished or differentiated from a board of advisors. So the board of directors for me, and the reason why I draw a distinction between those two, is this is about governance, right? So the board of directors is really where you start to understand, honestly, as a founder, with the number of people that you have in your stable, and with the revenue you're generating and the number of customers and the fact that you're gearing yourself up for scale at this point in time, you need to have a strong governance structure in place. And that's what your board of directors is for. Very often, I find myself having to even remind founders is that your future and the future of your organization or of your startup or of your company are not necessarily the same. In fact, it's the biggest lesson you're going to learn. The minute you incorporated and the minute you had this big vision and plans for growth and so on, it meant that there's your journey as an individual, but there's the journey of the organization. And what keeps a check and balance on that is what your board of governors is for. This is also the time where you've got enough data, you can start playing around with different models and start really thinking about how we're using that data to really create that flywheel and start ensuring that the demand is coming in and that you're able to supply. So you really want to start thinking about what your application of data is as an organization at this time. Of course, unless your business is a hardcore data business, in which case it was a core part of your product in the first place, right? Any comments on that, Lamre?
So first, I must apologize that I got disconnected for a bit on this, but this stage, I think, Tony, what I would like to comment on is just the entire framework. And for our participants today to look at this framework of the stages and to see it as that, a framework, a framework that helps you think through the journey. So it's not super prescriptive, but it helps to have a framework to think through stuff, especially on this journey. So you see the one side of the framework, which relates to number of employees, which helps to determine the stage, and then what do you do? So there could be certain things that we're saying do in the traction stage that you may want to do in the early stage. The advice would be think through it carefully, be mindful of what could be the impact of doing it too early, or doing it too late. Also, the second aspect of looking at this framework is to be sure you have done one thing at a particular stage before moving on in terms of people. So someone would say, so I could have 22 people and I'm still, can I have 12 people and I'm still? The answer is yes. Is to look at, but if you want to look at the framework from a number of people perspective, because as you go up the stage, what is required in terms of your organizational capacity or managing your human capital will change at each stage of this journey. Just like you're managing your financial capital and indeed your intellectual capital. But this framework is as it relates to the human capital. So today, that's the bit I just wanted to to share about
And I think
this framework. Yeah.
And it's a great emphasis. Again, as Lanre has said, these are guidelines. It's a framework. It's more food for thought and really reflecting around where are you and what are generally perceived to be the right investments for you to make from a people standpoint at what stage. It may differ from company to company, so it's not written in stone, but you really want to think about how your people decisions impact how your business is going to grow. So I think that that's a really good emphasis, Lanre. Thank you for that. So, we've spent a bit of time talking about hiring for growth and gone up the pyramid here and really tried to understand when do you hire what and so on. But I thought that also then what we kind of want to skip into is then understanding where does this talent then come from, right? And typically the way we look at it is that it tends to be three-pronged, right? So you can buy the talent, you can build the talent. Yeah.
Then can I jump in there? I just wanted to let the participants know that at this point, based on just what we talked about, that framework, if you do have any questions, it will be good. You can drop it in the chat box. If there's any aspect that maybe you're not clear or you just have a thought around something, just drop it in the chat box as we go on to talk about this next. It's also sort of like a framework, a way of thinking through as we move into now how you apply what we just talked about to create a people strategy. Tony, I will talk about, but if there, so that you're not carrying your questions as we go into application. So just drop the question in the chat box and then we'll address it. Yes, Tonya, please go on.
So I think, when we look at where talent will come from or where your people will come from, I think I speak for everybody on this call, right? When I say that typically it's almost like this hole that you can't get out of. We're always struggling to recruit top talent. That's one, without breaking the bank. And even this top talent is not as easily available as I just made it sound by saying we're always looking to recruit top talent, right? So without breaking the bank. Secondly, you can't match market salaries, right? I know, for example, and just to put some context to this, and I haven't actually looked to see if it's happening in Nigeria, but we've had such an uproar here with startups complaining that, oh, Microsoft set up an Africa Development Center, hired 400 engineers in the last 2 years, which I think is great for the market, but founders are complaining they can't compete with the salaries that an organization like Microsoft will be paying. And then within the last month, then the Google CEO announced, yes, oh, Google is also setting up a development center in Nairobi. And it's like, what? What's going to happen to us? So, I mean, this whole question about talent is a never-ending problem. And honestly, we're all looking for exceptional talent. Nobody wants just mediocre talent. And so you really want to think about, so where do I find the talent that I'm looking for? So typically what we have on the screen are the 3 options, right? So the first option is to buy the talent you need, which means that you're going out to the labor market and you're going to try and recruit the talent that you're looking for. And there are pros and cons to all of this, right? I think for me, Lanre, one of the first pros definitely is that if you're looking for fast time to market, I mean, by the time you start thinking of building talent and all that stuff, I don't know if you're going to get there quick enough. So buying talent, going out and recruiting, honestly does give you a bit of speed and velocity in terms of what you need to get done and when you need to get it done, right? But the downside of that is the huge amount of competition for limited talent. What's your take from your experience, Lanre, in terms of the market and a buy strategy?
So you said the big benefit of a buy strategy. Another benefit of a buy strategy is if you are lucky to buy the right talent could give you the benefit of a different perspective to your business and therefore help with growth. That's another benefit of buying the right talent. The other side of the coin now is the culture. So whatever culture you may have created or you are planning to create or you are working on, that talent you're buying is coming with their own idea or experience of culture. And depending on what stage you are, at early stage, there is it is easier for this bought talent to influence the culture, which may be maybe contrasting with your own idea of the culture you want to build. So that's one downside of buying talent, depending on the stage. So that's why if we look at the framework we shared earlier on, at the growth stage, now maybe at that stage your culture it's pretty formed, and as you find out as a founder, you are the custodian of culture in your business. It may be pretty formed or it's developing. So buying talent may not shift the culture so strongly that it deviates from what you want or what works for you. But there is that fitting bought talent, because the bought talent is like, look, I'm skilled. I have this, you need me. I have this thing, you need it. But this is how I want to work. And this is how I want to work with the people I work with, which may be at cross purposes with your own approach.
Yeah. Which takes us to the second one then. So the second option is to build, which means that you're looking internally at the talent you already have, and you're figuring out how do you develop them and get them ready to take on a new role within your organization. I think it's obvious for me on the build side of things that this is a function of time. So it means that you're kind of, you need a certain amount of time to get the existing talent that you have ready to take on the next position in your organization. So a build strategy is not like an overnight decision. It certainly means that you need time and honestly can be part of your longer term strategy, but just bear in mind that it takes time to build the talent that you need. I just want to reflect on build, by the way, as it relates to buy. oftentimes, even if you buy the talent, that talent may not be fit for purpose. So it doesn't come super ready, like off the shelf, like it was a box of Weetabix and you just add milk, right? You're going to have to do, I've never seen that happen, even in my entire career, even when I was, as an HR person. So there is a function of building, even when you have to buy talent. However, if you take build as a strategy for talent, as your lead strategy for talent, it means that you're going to have to invest time and energy in your existing people to get them ready for the next roles in the organization. Your reflections, Lanre, on the build piece.
Yeah, I mean, I like when you use the example of Weetabix, I was going to say, no, not Weetabix, Gary, Ijebu Gary is always ready. You buy it, you pour water, and it works all the time. If you could find the Ijebu Gary of talent, it's ready and it fits. Always fit for purpose. You want to drink it, you want to make eba, you want, anyway, though. I don't know if you, they just add that you Nigerians, we get that. It's always, but you just can't find it. It's not, it's usually you have to do work. Okay, someone's got their hands up, but I'll just learn this. So build as a strategy, like you said, what's the pro? The benefit of that, one side of the coin is that you are building people who have some level of loyalty. They are already probably culture fit anyways, so the fit part is not so. And another benefit of that is that you know what you're building with. It's like you're buying a house that you don't know what the plumbing system is like. This one, what you're building. What is the other side of the coin? Time. It takes time. There's another part of the other side of the coin. You may finish building and then Microsoft or Google come and take the person. Somebody buys that talent off you, So that is the other side of it. So it's, as you see, as we talk through this, it's none of this is going to be a silver bullet. You need to think through it. But one key piece of advice is, I would say, you cannot avoid building.
Yeah.
You cannot avoid it because even you as a founder, you are building yourself. You're going through a process of build. So my tip will be to always take time and think through the build aspect. The degree of build or the percentage of what you want to put in build may differ, but you must build. So find the right partner to support you in building. Key into other platforms where there's a building culture, graduate training programs, or when people build and there's excess capacity, those type of things. But build, you can't totally ignore. Yes, Tanya.
Yeah. It's curious you say that, and even in terms of finding the right partner, typical build strategies that I see a lot in the startup ecosystem is very much almost like apprentice-based models, right? So, for example, you've got one senior developer. That's who you started off with. He knows the entire system end to end. He's a co-founder or whatever. Could you get 3 junior developers that work under that senior developer, learn from him, almost like an apprentice model? I fundamentally believe that the best way to learn is learning by doing. So I'm seeing that becoming more and more common around how do you kind of help develop the next group of leaders in your organization, or the next, you're kind of building your people for the next role. So I think, I don't think you can get away from building. I think one of its biggest advantages is that it instills a lot of loyalty within your organization. It becomes almost a culture. It's the place that people know that you invest in them. But of course, as we know, as Lanre has said, I think the days of people working at Microsoft for 20 years are long gone. I was reading this book by Reid Hoffman, who's the founder of LinkedIn. He's just kind of updated an old book he'd written called The Startup of You. And he likes to refer to employment these days almost like a tour of duty. It's like the Marines, right? You go out to Afghanistan for a tour, you come back, you have the option to sign up again and decide if you're doing a second tour of duty or not. And I think employment has become, particularly in the startup ecosystem, a lot about tours of duty. So the question is, you can't live without building. You're going to have to build to a certain extent, but you need to prepare yourself for the inevitable. So what's your strategy for always building? I think that's the question I will toss back to the audience. I want to just
There's
quickly.
a hand up.
I know. I want to quickly
Somebody's,
touch on
you want to?
borrow. I think we quickly touch on borrow, so we take the question around this whole concept. If you don't mind, just give us 1 more minute. Borrow is easy enough. Borrowing is really temporary resources, consultants, contractors, get so and so to do the job for you on a short-term contract basis. I think we've all used these type of resources. They help plug a hole. Sometimes there'll be resources that you borrow because you cannot afford them. Other times there'll be resources that you borrow because it's the nature of the work is really short-term and you don't need a full-time employee doing it. By the way, the board of advisors we referenced earlier is a great strategy in terms of borrowing. If you want to comment on that, Lanre, and then we'll take the question. I just wanted us to be able to finish this piece so we're addressing it holistically.
Good to know. Thanks for that's a good approach. So the borrow side, what are the two sides of the coin of borrow? Borrow helps because you are borrowing, so there's no long-term investment from a financial capital perspective. Sometimes you're borrowing and you're not really paying for it. That's the benefit too. If you borrow right, it could be as good as buying, right? Without paying the hefty sum if you borrow right. The good thing is that in the African space, there are many people who want to give back. There are many people who they have these skills, they have the talent, and they're looking for a space to be challenged, and they're willing to do it in their spare time. Right? Those are the advantages of borrow. I think the key thing about borrowing is to let people know. In my organization, we once had someone, a mid-level to senior person who by virtue, because of marriage, had to move back into the country, was going to be in the country for a year, did not want to get into employment, but wanted to work in an environment where she could still use her skills. And for 1 year, was willing to, so that was a borrow, and it was at literally no cost. So sometimes it's to make your organization open to that. And that is where you will find. What is the other side of borrowing? A beggar has no choice sometimes, but in this borrowing, you have to choose. It is not everybody that is available to borrow that you should borrow. You should still have your process to check that that person is a fit in terms of which stage you are at. So don't borrow what you may need don't borrow a specialist at the early stage. It may just not work. Also in borrowing, like a total duty mentality, be open to make sure there are timelines, right? When you choose your exit. So borrowing could be great, but the other side of the coin is finding the right person to borrow, the right fit, and also when the borrow has to go, it could be challenging. So if borrow is part of your strategy, have a good borrowing strategy for replacement, and make sure the people you borrow, you give them a good experience. So yeah, that's what I will add to.
By the way, borrow is also a great strategy for talent pipelining. Huh? Sometimes you borrow, and this is going to be your next head of sales, right? So you also want to look at it through that lens. It's a great opportunity to test, almost like, how do you work with this individual? Are they aligned with your culture and that sort of thing? So oftentimes I see people start off as advisors and then end up taking a role in the organization. It really works well, and it's almost like a 90-day guarantee. Right, you can send the product back if it doesn't work.
You buy.
Exactly.
Test before you buy, kind of thing.
Try before you buy. Yeah. So we do have a couple of questions, and maybe we take a small pause here. So I'll start with the last one, and actually the last two. I mean, one was a comment about retaining talent being very difficult in the tech space, and Ekerete also echoes that and says market observation has revealed that talent in the tech sector are most mobile. I like the use of mobile. Good. Even banks are complaining. How should startups best recruit and retain performing talent? Will getting tech solutions, in brackets robots, be better? I'm curious to know, Lanre, what your take is on that.
Man, I have this conversation all the time. So first, for Ola, it's not just in tech. It's not just in tech. There's there's a war for talent out there, whether you agree or not. It is war, and in war, you must have a strategy. It's like if you lived in Ukraine right now, you did not start the war, but the war is affecting you. So what is your plan? Are you going to run? Are you going to stay and fight? Or are you going to hide? So for any business, this war for talent is actually affecting all of us. Depending, it may vary by industry. Maybe tech is the one that is most obvious, because I will tell you, we did not have enough tech talent in Africa anyways before the war started. This tech talent war has been, look, Tonya, since we were Microsoft, how many people do we know that have had the tour of duty of IBM, Microsoft, Oracle, Amazon now? That already was SAP, you know, we know all those guys. I mean, a lot of our former colleagues, some have done the tour of, they've done the 3, they've done the 4. So this is not new. It's not new, this war for talent. But the thing is, what do you do as a startup? It's, look, even the more established companies, it's even bigger. Some are losing an entire department, entire IT department. I know of a bank that the entire IT security department left over a period of 18 months. They had to build from scratch. So what do? It's all of what we're saying. This strategy, which stage you are at, that framework, which stage you are at, and are you going to build, buy, or borrow? The first thing I would say, like I advise my execs when I coach them, is don't be sore about it. In fact, you should expect it. Because for a lot of people, it gets a bit emotional, and that's not good. Expect it, prepare for it, and have a strategy. That's the first thing. Your strategy should suit you. Know that you are going to lose people. But remember, you are losing to Canada, you are losing to UK, you are losing to where? You can also, somebody is also losing to you. So that's one. So be clear on what your strategy is. Secondly, is to, I mean, because we are talking tech, rethink what does it mean? You know, the world of work is changing. Could you have somebody who would otherwise have been lost still be working for you? Rethink your work. So the borrow strategy, rethink, or maybe try to create, I would say, your work in a way that it can be outsourced to these same people that you are trying to retain. It's interesting. I mean, we have a situation where somebody's gone for their master's. While they are doing the running the master's program in the UK, they are going to work. And the work they are going to do is going to pay a certain amount of money per hour while they're studying. And you know, the work could be in the UK, the work could be in Nigeria. It depends, you know, you leveraging technology. So that's what, but generally it's to look, how do you retain talent? Be good to people. All of the other age-old things, be clear on your values, create a great culture, have conversations, because sometimes, yeah, a conversation may be what's keeping the person. And I think, Tonya, we're going to talk about it subsequently. The fourth type of capital that all of this comes, you know, creates. Well, I'll leave that to when we talk about it. But to that question, have a strategy that knows that this is happening to you, that you're at war.
You know, Lanre, and I come from an opposite school, a slightly opposite school of thought, and let me tell you why. I think, like I said earlier, that the era of people working for Barclays Bank for 20 years is done, right? I actually quite like the concept of a tour of duty. It allows me as a business owner to understand and to set my expectations and to calibrate those expectations. So I know that typically an engineer, it's a 3-year cycle, right? After 3 years, he's going to be offered something else by somebody. And quite frankly, having spent many years in HR, I never counter offer. It's the worst thing you can ever do, right? Yeah. So I like when you said make a plan, because you will always have attrition, right? And it's inevitable. So what's your plan around that? Unfortunately, what we're seeing in the market is almost the opposite ripple effect. And obviously for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, which means that employers are not investing as much in their people anymore. So that's the downside of it. What used to happen before is that, you know, you graduated from college, you joined Barclays Bank, you worked at Barclays Bank for 20 years, they took you on trainings, they invested in you, you stayed, you know, you had your pension, and eventually you retired. And so it was kind of like this give and take scenario happening there. I think what we're seeing today happening is that people, it's extremely difficult to retain. You're going to lose people anyway. I wish I could say it any better. So your plan should be to have a plan and account for the fact that you're going to lose people. In fact, for my business, if Microsoft comes over and hires one of my devs, I couldn't for the life of me imagine not being happy for them. It's going to be a wonderful experience. And you know what? In 5 years, they will leave Microsoft too, right? And maybe go start their own startup and they'll have better experiences for it. So God bless them as they go on their journey. Make a plan and know that you're going to lose people, especially great tech resources. There is a piece in Ola's note that I love though. And when we started this conversation, we talked about forms of leverage. And one of the forms of leverage is code. So part of your plan should be around, as opposed to only leveraging human capital, how do I leverage code? Are there processes in intellectual property, intellectual capital? Are there processes in your business today that can be automated? And you're not. Even simple things like test for your tech platforms. How do you do test automation? You really want to start looking at your business. One of the most inspiring stories for me all the time, I'm a big fan of lean organizations. I always ask, how did WhatsApp with, I don't know, 13 employees, or was it Instagram, or was it both of them, sell to Facebook for like 8 billion or 13 billion? I forget the numbers. The point is they're all astronomical with the exception of the people, right? 11 people running a $13 billion business. And the answer is code. So great group of people. What can you automate? And really, I think that that's constantly on your mind as a startup founder around how do I leverage technology? How do I leverage code to automate the pieces that can be automated? How do I stay lean and therefore have a group of employees who I pay well, are part of a great culture, but I know it's a tour of duty. I don't think today anybody born after, and please, I don't want to age myself, but after a certain year there that's close to the millennial space, I don't think any of them are going to be at a company for 10 years. You're not being practical. That would be my take. Yeah. Good.
Okay.
So
the intellectual capital now, maybe a bit to add and how these three forms of capital tend to work together. In managing your human capital, there's also some intellectual capital you can create. So yes, like you said, 13 people working together, that's for, or 12 people, 13 people working in that creating that multi-billion dollar organization. It means there was some sort of code in terms of how they work, which we will say is culture. So that in itself could also be a part of the strategy. The other piece about the strategy, when I said make sure you have conversations. So we all have, I think it's easy to come to the point where you know that you are going to lose people. But part of accepting that is it's easier when you know when the person is going to leave than when they leave without you knowing. And that's where the culture is important. That's why
I feel like we lost Lanre. Is it just me?
No, it's not.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Okay,
There
so
you are,
I'm back.
Lanre. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, at what point did you hear me up to?
You were saying, you know, it's about knowing when somebody leaves vis-a-vis not knowing when they leave, and that's down to culture. And then you were going into the culture. Yeah.
Down to culture, and it's down to leadership. So because if you know somebody is leaving in 12 months, in 6 months, it's easier for you to then key into your pipeline or your plan to your strategy to borrow or to buy or to build, it's easier. So as a leader, as a custodian of culture in the organization, if create that culture where you can know, so the guy doesn't up and leave and then you have to scramble. So those will be the additional pieces as we go into culture. Yes, Tony.
Yeah. So I see a question, and I think we're going to touch on it because we're moving on to talking culture a little bit around the entitlement syndrome for longer term employees or more experienced employees. So I think what we'll do, Lanre, is let's talk a little bit about the culture element. And I know that as part of what you do, you spend a lot of time coaching leaders on the concept of culture and how to build a high performing culture, right? So, I know we put together a couple of slides. I don't know, we want to talk first on discovery a little bit, and I'd love your perspectives on, on, on how do you figure out what your culture is or what your values are as an organization. We can start there, we'll go through them, and then we'll wrap it all up together.
Okay, good. So thanks, Sonia. The first thing is to realize that it starts with you as the leader. It starts with you. You need to have clarity for yourself. It's the only way you can be authentic. You need to, so as much as you know that you know yourself, we all feel we know ourselves. You know yourselves, that's your view, that's your perception. But what is other people's perception of you? The first place you start is your perception of yourself. Because once you get clarity in that, you can then begin to manifest that such that that is then what people experience of you, and it shapes their perception. And there is technology and there's science that supports this. And I shared with Tonya, happened to be a licensed practitioner of an insight discovery personality profiling system, which from the profiling system connects to a learning system. And I encourage because the human behavioral science is so advanced today. All of you are probably going to use it in your companies, whether you like it or not, predictive analysis, people's buying patterns and all of that. All of that is behavioral science, but there's an aspect of it that is about personality and how that shapes, who you are, and therefore who you become as a leader, who you could be as a professional, and who you can be as a member of a team. So the discovery process is about you first. Understand yourself such that, because the person you are will also impact the culture of your organization. You cannot really say, oh, this is the culture of, look at any organization, their culture, and look at the leaders. Leaders being the custodians of culture. And it's a very important job you have as a leader, that being in the custodian of culture, but it starts with you. So I'll say the first step is being clear on who you are, which shapes your values, shapes your preferences, and therefore your personality. Spend some time getting clarity on that. Have data to support you about yourself or any other of the founders. I co-founded the current company that is my day job now, and I have a business partner that we are opposite types in terms of personality. We're opposite types. We know it. What is the benefit of that? People say, oh, opposites work, and all of that. No, it's because we have the awareness that we are opposite types. Therefore, we are able to look to each other for value, because then that gives us a 360-degree view. I know that what I don't see, my business partner will see. So when my business partner expresses a view on something, I first check with myself, okay, I didn't know that, rather than me see it as, no, that's wrong. It takes practice, it takes working through it, it's a journey, but go through that discovery process of yourself, of the people you're working with, and based on that, begin to create and shape that culture that we create value for you.
Yeah. So, and I'm happy you talked about have the data to back you up, because oftentimes what I'll find with senior leaders, with founders, organizational, up in the top of the hierarchical food chain, is people feel they know themselves, right? But and I can tell you, oh well, I'm Tonya. I'm kind of like excitable. I'm an extrovert. I believe in results. Like they can tell you all that stuff. But I really like the emphasis around have the data that tells you, because oftentimes we have our own blind spots, particularly about ourselves. So I like this concept of discovery, and I recently went through it myself as a founder, and I have to tell you, I mean, I'd had the advantage of doing a lot of all of these kind of personality insights types of things before by virtue of being in corporate. But it changes. And that was really surprising to me. It was not the same. And in fact, it drove me to go back and look for the one that was like 15 years old and then 10 years ago and 5 years ago, and how have they changed? When you really start to see the evolution of yourself as an individual is actually quite interesting. So the things I thought I knew based on an old personality test were actually not valid anymore. And my perceptions and how I react to things, I think also it's part of the personal maturity journey that had also changed. So I think that this discovery piece, Lanre, as you've said, is a super important element.
Yeah, Stanley, I'm going to put a plug in here without any shame, which is that if you're interested, I will tell you, check it out, Insights Discovery. It's one of the various personality typing solutions that are out there. What makes it unique and different, what makes it different is this. One, is simple to understand for you and for other people. Two, it's beyond just letting you know the type of person you are. I'm sure you know, Tonya, back in the day, we do all of these things. They told us what our personality type was, and so what? So if you're going to invest in any personality typing solution, ask the question, so what? And that's where Insights Discovery is great, because it takes you from that quickly into application, into leadership manifestation, team effectiveness, personal effectiveness, which builds on the knowledge of personality typing, not only of yours, but of the people that are your stakeholders and you work with. So please, the science is there, use it. That's what I'll say.
Great. So I think the second point is one you mentioned in passing when you were talking about the discovery piece, because I think that the traditions, the culture of an organization, understanding who you are and your own personal values is strongly anchored in the concept of authenticity. So, so Landry, from your view, this authenticity piece, why is this important in terms of building the right culture in an organization?
Okay, authenticity speaks, it goes back to leadership. Guys, let's think about it. When you see all of those supposed scandals, like, happen, I mean, social media is a god with all of them and all of that, it's usually about a disappointment or we thought this person was like this and the person is not like this. Have you noticed that there are certain things that people in the limelight, there are certain things they do and it's a scandal, but you have people around you that do that stuff every day and it's not a scandal, right? So it's one of the things in leadership development. Say, look, as a leader, and you see there are certain leaders that do exactly those things that, there's some leaders, I'll put in inverted commas, they'll do certain things that is not a scandal, and then someone else does it and it's a scandal. Why? They have already let us know, I'm like this, I do this crap and I do it every time. So you're not going to judge me for it. So authenticity speaks to leadership. As a leader, you need to be authentic, because once you deviate from what is supposed to be your authentic self, people get disappointed. And usually it's the people that are close to you, especially in the organization, that see this. And in building the culture of an organization, you cannot be a leader and be saying or putting forth something and doing otherwise. The people can see it. Now, what is the challenge of authenticity in leadership? When you try to be what you are not, it's going to be a lot of hard work. Look, you already have so many things to deal with as a leader in business that you do not want to add on what we call forming in Nigeria, which is putting up a front, like having to put up a facade every time. It's hard work. You don't want that work. So it's the more authentic you can be in creating in yourself and using that to influence the culture of the organization. And there are a number of things you should audit the culture of your organization. You should take time to step back and look at it. Is this what you want to create? And if there's stuff that is not going right, you need to look at. So culture work is something that does not stop. You have to be looking at the culture of the organization. There'll be certain people that are promoters of the culture as it's designed, and there'll be certain people who are not. And you must take decisions about those people in terms of have a conversation, exit, or whatever you need to do. So it's that I hope that kind of like speaks to it.
I think it makes sense. And I think it's important to note there is no right way or wrong way on this, right? The idea behind it is to follow the philosophy that's authentic to you. There's no right or wrong way actually to even build, the culture of your organization, right? The point is around what's authentic to you and are you staying true to that? I think that's a very important point there. Yeah. So the last piece, and you've said it 3 times, so it's time for you to demystify what you mean when you keep referring to the people on this call and saying that they are the custodians of the culture in their organization. Did we lose you, Lanre? Or did everyone lose me?
We can hear you, Tonya.
Okay, so I think we lost him. Let's give him a second to come back. Yeah. Are you there, Lanre? Can you hear us? I mean, I can see him. I just can't hear him. Lanre? Can anyone else see him? Hold on. Okay, you can hear me, Lanre? Oh, there you are. We couldn't hear you.
Okay.
So speak to custody.
I think I'm back. Can you hear me, Tonya?
Can hear you now.
Can you hear me? I can hear you. Let me remove the camera. I can hear you. I'm here. Can you? What happened?
We can hear you, Lanre. Go ahead.
Can anyone see me or hear me? Yes. Okay, good. Sorry about that. Custody. So, being a custodian means that first, when you're clear on what you want, I think there's a delay. Okay, can you hear me now? I started to speak already.
Go ahead.
Okay, good. So I said that leaders being custodians of culture starts with all the stuff we have talked about. Go through the process of discovery, be authentic and be clear on what custodian you have the culture, you should protect it. Because there will be different perspectives on this. There will be different people who will they want it to be a particular way. But it's kind of like this is the point where you need your strong conviction about what you want the culture to be. You can take opinions, but be mindful of what opinion you take and stick to it. And if you change, big change you make. So custody, if you think about custody, the custodian of something, let's say custodian of culture. So if you look at the African traditional system, there are people who are the custodians of culture. It's not a democracy. It's not a democratic system as a custodian of culture, but it is also not inflexible because culture must speak to the times. So I'm not saying those ones, but you need to be on your culture to deliver and be sure that it is delivering it. If it's not delivering it, which is performance, then it's time to look at it. Not because somebody said it's time to look at it, not because a bunch of people in the organization come together and say, you must be clear. And I think, and I'll say that, protect it and let it be clear to everybody. Sometimes the quest for financial capital could shake down your custodial title or position. The human capital acquisition could also be one that shapes going into partnerships. All of these things are things that could affect that custodial position that you have. So make sure that it's something you think through and have clarity in your mind and discuss it where it is required. But that's the custody piece. It comes from the other two steps, and it's a lot about protecting that which you know is important and that delivers for the business.
Yeah. I like the parallels you've drawn, even from a tradition standpoint, which is to say that even culturally speaking, at a traditional level, it's not usually a democratic process, right? I'm a big fan of founders being bold and opinionated on their culture, on what's really important. I'm a big fan of founders who, at the point of hiring, are not caught up in trying to convince people or to seek alignment on a culture standpoint, because your culture is what lends authenticity to your organization. And in fact, I think, when we're having a discussion around this topic, I was at the point where I was thinking that, when you really look at what culture the impact it ends up having on your organization. And this is why I've pulled down the piece that says social capital. It builds in that fourth element, or the fourth type of capital. And honestly, what could potentially be your biggest form of leverage, which is the social capital that you generate as an organization. I know, Lanre, when you and I had a prior discussion on this, we kind of summarized and said, it's so interesting that when you look at the culture piece and the outcome of that, which is social capital, with an internal lens, it's what translates into being your employee value proposition. And with an external lens, it what translates into being the brand of your organization. So right in the middle of that is culture, your culture, how you do things, what's acceptable, what's unacceptable, what you value, what you do not value. Who gets promoted is a reflection of your culture. Who gets fired is a reflection of your culture. And internally, it's what influences employees to feel they work at a great company. So it's your employee value proposition. And externally, it's what customers really start to see as your brand. I think that summarizes our thoughts on how this comes together, Lanre.
Yes, it does. And to extend
Okay, I think we've lost him again. Okay,
yeah,
you're back.
I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back. Go ahead.
Okay, good. I said social capital is what you and I are using even in this conversation. It's the social capital which has been built over the years, but more importantly is that for a business, the returns, the ROI on social capital is multi-dimensional. Yeah. And that's why, and it makes a difference. It makes a huge difference. I don't think we have enough time to really talk about it, but the way you have explained it is great, Tonya. It's about the external facing part of it, the internal facing part of it. And even as a founder, sometimes that's what's going to excite you as to what is it that you have created. That's probably what will keep you going when things become tough. The fact that you've created this thing, right? That's what companies become at the end of the day.
Yeah, very good. So Lanre, I mean, I know that we had lots to talk about, and we've talked for so long already. And I know we had to really manage ourselves back and say, okay, let's not talk about that and let's not talk about that, because you and I can talk about people, culture, hiring, retention, employee value propositions till the cows come home. We do have a couple of questions in the chat window that we never got to address. And I'm going to read out one, and I'd really like your take on it. But I'd also like to encourage the group on the call, if you have comments, reflections, and also Lanre and I have been talking for the last, 1 hour, 40 minutes or something like that. It would be wonderful if you could just put up your hand and unmute your line and ask your question. I'll just call on you if you put up your hand. But if you're really feeling shy, you can type your question into the chat window. So Lanre, let me ask you this question. So how do you address the problem of entitlement syndrome? And the reason I held it until now was because I knew we were going to touch on culture, and I'd love for you to reflect on this, particularly in the build phase, especially in businesses with a strong hierarchical structure. There could be an apprentice who becomes extremely proficient but is stepped down, or the master who is stepped down becomes aggrieved. So that entitlement syndrome, what's your recommendation and how would you encourage folks on this call to deal with that?
I was, when I saw that question, I was going to ask maybe to actually shed a bit of light on the question. Do you want to just put some words to support the question and aid our understanding? So I don't want, so that the entitlement syndrome I have a perspective on. Maybe, are you here?
Let me see.
Hello, maybe is here.
Yeah, maybe is here. If you don't mind unmuting yourself. Okay. While he figures out how to do that, you can go ahead, Lanre.
So the entitlement syndrome, it's like it's a perspective. The people who you see as entitled, do they see themselves as entitled? That's so it's back to perspective. So entitlement is, I mean, the other day I was with some of my younger colleagues that were trying to define it, where people feel that, oh, you owe me just because I woke up today. I should get something just because. The entitlement syndrome is one that did not create itself. I think parents usually kind of like create it and support it. And all of us that are parents of teenagers or early adults, you can look back and see how you contributed to that. But in the corporate space, again, it is back to culture. You need the talent. The talent may come with some sort of entitlement mentality, but that sometimes, culture eats strategy for breakfast, they say. If the culture in the organization does not promote entitlement, and you need to be mindful of it, because even as leaders of the business, you may have that entitlement mentality as well. Oh, because I'm the founder, therefore I am this. So it's about being mindful of a culture that is a performance-based culture, productivity-based culture. All of those things are how I think it's here to stay. The perspectives are there. Gen Z versus millennial versus, baby boomer, all the different generations see entitlement as a different thing. If required, you may want to have a conversation about it, get clarity and address what are the downsides of entitlement. Does it enhance performance or does it work against performance? So that's in the time we have. Yes, that's what I'll say to it, Tony. Do you have a take on?
I do, and I'll give my take quite quickly. I think I said earlier that who gets hired, who gets fired, who gets promoted. That's your culture. If you really want to know what your culture is, look at those people and you'll understand what your culture is, right? I think that the one thing I'll encourage every founder is reward a high-performing culture, reward strong performers, and performance is not purely task-based. It's an all-round performer, right? So we talked about social capital. Are these people who are helpful to others? Are they building, and lifting others? Are they collaborators and so on? If this junior engineer, for example, is that person and please forgive me, people tend to say HR people are cold, and maybe I spent a bit too much time in that role. For me, it's pretty clear. You reward the performance and you reward the great performer. And it doesn't matter if it's the apprentice or the master. Now, I'm not implying that an apprentice then will come and take the position of the master in the space of 1 week, because you become a master through practice and through experience. But you really want to send clear indicators and clear signals on what behavior gets rewarded and what doesn't. And that shouldn't be negotiable for you as a founder who's trying to structure a strong, high-performing culture in your organization. So my take is, don't sit on the fence, be very clear, reward great performance, do not reward entitlement. That's not the culture you want. And it should be clear the behavior that you're rewarding based on your actions. That would be my take on it. So yeah, I agree with you, Lanre, on that piece. I would just say I'm hard and fast on elements like that. And I really think that especially when it's your business, you know, you're invested. You really need to make sure you're getting the best out of your people. So that would be my take. We had an earlier question from Ashil. It seems to me that the stages, so I think this is that pyramid around founding, early, blah, blah, can be intertwined. Have you seen a startup in that situation, and can you indicate how the company managed the situation? Ashil, I think you're still here. What situation, if you don't mind being clarifying that a little bit, I'm sorry, I missed the question earlier because I was sharing my screen, and it's only when I stopped sharing that I saw there was an earlier question there. Do you mind elaborating what you mean by that situation? And then for the rest of the group on the call, I think we've got a couple of minutes left. If anyone has a comment or question, please put up your hand or put the question in the chat window, and we'll take it as one of our last questions for the day.
Yes, I think I was referring to situations where maybe a company start in the early phase, maybe accelerate very fast, maybe have to skip the traditional pyramid to get to the top of the pyramid, but hard to go back to the basic and make sure you do what you're supposed to be doing, even though you grow faster than you don't follow the traditional pyramid, but you find yourself in a situation where you can go from the 0 to 5 to having 50 plus employees, but at the same time, how do you make sure you invest in those different elements of the different stages?
It's a great question. Lanre, do you want to take a stab at it, and I'll give my view as well, or would you like me to go ahead?
I'll tell you, it's simple. I mean, if you skip any of the stages, the first thing is to be aware that you have skipped. Be awareness. Be aware that you have skipped, and be aware of what you have skipped. Otherwise, it'll come back and bite you later. So it's like the whole stages of team development. So you want to go from 10 people to 50 people. That's additional 40 people of different perspectives. What happens to culture? So, you know, the forming, norming, storming, before you get to performing stages of development thing, you need to make some investments in ensuring that things that should happen. Even matured companies are doing that. Actually, where I am right now, I'm working with a matured company who are bringing in 2 senior executives, and we're spending a day and a half just to walk through a process to ensure that that change or that speeding through of bringing in 2 new executives does not affect the performance of the organization too adversely. And again, there's a bit of science you can leverage. So just awareness is the first thing. Be aware you have skipped and what is the impact of that skipping, and then do something about it. That's my, yes, Tonya.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I mean, you know, I always say for me, this the difference, the reason why we say startups and not SMEs, right, is there's an implied pace and velocity to the growth that happens in the startup space vis-a-vis a person who opens a shop, right? The things, and the faster you go, probably the more startup you are, and actually most likely you're a wonderful success story at this point in time. But it's very much like an engineering team, a software engineering team, and the concept of technical debt, right? Where you had to move fast to get the product in front of the customer. So you cut some shortcuts or skipped some stages, but there's a whole lot of technical debt that's still sitting in there that you're going to have to go back and fix at some point in time. The thing with these situations sometimes is they're not as obvious as you imagine they are. I would say, and I'm not trying to minimize or oversimplify the situation, but if you look at half the stuff that's been happening in the startup world globally over, I think it's probably longer, a bunch of years, but even, I don't know if any of you saw the article that's in the New York Times today, I think, or yesterday, on this company called Bolt, the financial services company. And when you look at the story of the growth, the customer acquisition, the, you know, raised how much, then employed how many hundreds of other people, and then into the next and into the next and into the next. And yes, there's a problem there, honestly, in my view, a little bit about, well, a bunch about the founder, but some of it is, you can put it down to, you know, at what point do you stop? You've been at such a fast pace, and take a look back and say, where are the holes and what did we skip? in the spirit of growth, but we know we're coming back to fix this. I think you're going to have to do it sooner or later, whether you like it or not. One of the more well-known examples is the example of Facebook. So they did a whole lot of, remember, in fact, the whole theory was move fast and break things, right? Which is the whole element or the essence behind skipping. But at some point, Zuck had to stop and be like, okay, I need a Sheryl Sandberg operations. Come in, you're an experienced business builder, manager, whatever we want to call her, come and help plug some of these holes that are in the system. So it happens more frequently than we imagine, particularly for startups, because that's the essence and that's the spirit of it. The problem is it goes unchecked too long. That's where you have real issues around governance, around sustainability. So you're going to have to, at some point, take a pause, go back to it and understand where the gaps are and what are the major things that you skipped in the interest of speed, which is good, but you're going to have to go back and fix them. So that's my only, and that's based on experience and what I've seen. I think that you will have to at some point really understand where things broke, and how you're bringing them, kind of building up the quality on that. That would be my take on it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Damola, you have your hand up.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, go
Yes,
ahead.
you can hear them.
Okay, all right. Yeah, thank you very much. Interesting session. So I wanted to ask about, remunerating this talent, the people that you have in your team. I mean, at the back of your mind, just like, I lean towards Tonya around. Yes, you are definitely going to lose people at some point in time, right? Having that at the back of your mind, but then also wanting to remunerate right. Yes, I mean, I read somewhere that if you want to, I mean, personally now, if you want to develop a skill, you stay where you are. If you want to earn more, you move companies, right? So as a founder, how do you make that balance? You don't want to invest so much because you know that, again, this person is going to leave, but then you also want to remunerate right. I mean, there are a lot of things around. Startups today are offering stock options. Some people offer full health cover, some partial health cover. And things like that. Is there an international best practice in terms of doing this? Or you just say startups should have kind of like minimum things that they must have. Again, because you are engaging with international players and things, you want to have some standards that they can also refer to and say, okay, yeah, you're doing something right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Tonya, let
Mohammed.
me just, Damola, it's an interesting question, and it's not a startup challenge, what you have just described. So first, there's no international standard for remuneration. Do not let anybody deceive you, right? There's none. It's back to culture, values, what you want to, what you are trying to achieve. So I'll tell you a simple story. So we worked for Microsoft, right? Microsoft does not buy official cars. What else you don't have an official car. So when we started in Nigeria, anybody who's worked in Nigerian market, I mean, we supposedly were talent, we were hired, and the companies we worked for had official cars for us, but the company said no official cars. There's even nowhere to post it in the financial statements of this company we work for. They don't own assets like that, right? Tony, But you know what? We have to find and there I was, so I'm leaving my official, it was, and it could lead to losing the talent. So remuneration, but we had to get creative. It took us and the company working something out where it was not about the official car, it was about having something that was suitable and all of that. And we worked out a situation with a third party, which was a bank. So in terms of what is the standard someone will tell you about how to remunerate your people, you have to look at a lot of factors. Look at the market, look at yourself, look at the person, and look at the person's performance, right? So you at some point you will come to certain structure. You will have a framework and a structure which people that come and join will fit in, whether that structure includes stock options or healthcare or whatever.
Okay, we lost Lanre again. Let's give him a couple of seconds.
And when do not that time.
Okay,
I don't know
you're
if I'm
back,
back,
Lanre.
Tonya.
Yeah,
Yes, okay.
you're back.
I think I said by PCR that it's
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
there's no one size fits all. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I agree with Lanre. I don't think there's no international standard. I used to tell people all the time, even when I was HR at Microsoft, I would say we would hire people out of Microsoft US into Microsoft Kenya, and we'd have to bump up their pay, right? People have this impression that in America you get paid more. It's not always like that. In fact, the highest earners were always these lucky Nigerian employees, actually, right? Because it's always a factor of different things, cost of living, that sort of thing. What I will say, though, I think we lack in the startup ecosystem is enough data. So, for example, you could go, if I was in Kenya and I was in working at Diageo, right? All I need to do is buy the regular annual PwC salary survey. I map. They'll have benefits, they'll have job levels, what is this person like, and I map against that, and then I have my own policy. For example, at Microsoft, the policy was they pay at the 75th percentile. That's it, right? And you kind of know and you can benchmark that. What I'm finding us struggling a lot with, and I'm sure all of you have gone through this, is there is no, number one, half the roles that are sitting in startups are not even there in corporates, right? So even if you bought that PwC survey, it means nothing to you because they don't have customer success and they don't have product managers. So you don't even know what you're comparing with and it's irrelevant. Number two, you want to compare yourself against the people that you compete with for talent. There's no point comparing yourself with the government and you know that you and the government are never going to compete for talent. So one of the things, Damal, I think that, we probably need to start doing a little bit better on the continent is, and we're supposed to be in tech, right? We need to start crowdsourcing some of this information because the truth is nobody has a benchmark on what's the standard, what's the going. I can't tell you how many calls this year alone I've done with heads of people, particularly the ones who are sitting in America and are hiring for Africa roles for this fintech or that, whatever, and there's no data in the market. So I think we do need to start thinking about how do we find the right data, and honestly, once you have the data, even for people, because the grass is always greener. So I think, we lack data and that's a mega problem. But the second problem is that sometimes, and I was laughing, Lanre, I'm going to make fun of you because you gave a very Gen X response to a Gen Z problem. So in the startup universe, a lot of the hires are going to be younger, more agile. They actually couldn't care less for a company car that's not relevant to them. And honestly, they don't even care about a pension fund either, right? So even if we share that data with them, it's completely irrelevant to them. I think, and increasingly what we're seeing in this market, they want to be paid well, they want to be appreciated, they want to be recognized, and they want to grow. A lot of times I'm finding with that generation, which is the generation that makes the largest population in Africa, quite frankly, they are actually not even looking to you to grow them, right? They're going to be the first guys signing up for blah, blah code school or, blah, blah course, right? And they'll pay for themselves. And they don't owe you anything. In fact, that's why it's really easy for them to leave. So the question then becomes, what's your competitive advantage when you're trying to hire in a market like that? And I honestly think it's going to be a function of culture in the context that, do these people know they're appreciated? And does that appreciation reflect in the paycheck they get? Does that balance out against the lifestyle they're seeing their founder living? So is it one of those where the founder is getting $1 million and you're just getting peanuts? Is it a culture of equitable fairness, equitable? I mean, I see people talking stock options, quite frankly, I don't know. I'm like, when are you going to IPO so that this stock option means something to me? In fact, even in my history at Microsoft, we got stocks. The younger generation, they came in, they're like, I don't want stocks, give me my cash, right? Because I don't care for long-term. Stock options are things that keep me here. It's going to vest over a 5-year period. I don't know where I'm going to be in 5 years. So, and we don't have a market that's vibrant enough that it's IPOing unicorns every other week. So the question, and I think what we really need to do as an industry is really start sharing openly. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to say who is paid how much, but I really think we need to have something that brings us all together, that allows us to start creating the right benchmarks and allows us not to start getting priced out of the market. In fact, half the people paying a startup growth marketer $15,000, because I've seen that in the market today, people coming out of Silicon Valley, and quite frankly, they have no reference point. So how do we help fix that? Because the stronger those structures are for us, the better it is for us as startup founders. That would be my take on it. I don't know if I answered your question, Damola. And if you want to come back on something, that's fine before we close the call. Yeah. Good. So Lanre, I think we are done with our questions, and we are 13 minutes past time, and we've kept everybody very long. So I want to say, first of all, thank you so much for giving us your time today, Lanre. It was a very enjoyable discussion. I had a really great time speaking with you. I would really like to ask, if you don't mind, typing your email address in the chat window so that anybody on the call that wants to get in touch with you to talk about culture, to talk about leadership development, to talk about, kind of raising the game on the leaders that they have in their organization, that they have the opportunity to get in touch with you. So if you don't mind, type your email address in the window, then that will be great. Yeah, excellent. The slides will be made.
LinkedIn, Larry,
yeah,
it's easy. Happy to have these conversations. Yes.
Fantastic. The slides will be made available, as will the recording. And then I want to thank everybody for making the time to listen to Lanre and I bantering this evening. I hope you enjoyed it. And either one of us is available for further chats and conversations. And again, like I always say, we are honored to be a part of your journey, and looking forward to speaking with all of you again. So thank you very much. Lanre, do you have anything you want to say before we wrap up the call?
Something's going on. Yeah. Did you ask me to do something? The line went off.
If there's anything you want to say, final words before we wrap up the call.
It's just to say thank you, guys. Thank you so much, Tonia. It's of course always a pleasure to do stuff with you. I know and will continue to enjoy the social capital we've created over time. It's one of our biggest assets that we say we have on the continent. So for all of the founders here, congratulations on first choosing to do this. I will tell you, in working with leaders over time, it's not easy, and if anybody ever told you it's easy, they lied. They were joking. Yeah, it's not easy. It's not going to be easy, and it really does not get easier. So what do you need to do? You need to find out which makes you want to keep doing it. Once you find that, then that's the journey. But thank you so much, guys. A pleasure. I will be happy to have further conversations with you. Have a great.
Thank you. Thank you, Lanre. Thank you very much.
Wherever you are.
Yeah. Thank you all, and have a great evening. And we'll speak again soon.
Cheers.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Yeah.